I'm an abuse survivor, a rape survivor, and a domestic violence survivor who's actually lived in hiding under a fake name and a ghost file. I've been homeless and lived in my car and eaten the food restaurants we're throwing away at the end of the night. And I am a cancer survivor and a medical miracle who's been defying the doctor's death deadlines for over 20 years. So the first time I heard "you'll be dead by," they said I'd be dead by Christmas of 2000. And I've continued to hear those expiration dates all the way through my cancer journey in 2019. And so I would say there have been several really pivotal moments.
Welcome to the Modern Stage Podcast. I'm Leah Guy, your host. And as always, I'm very excited that you're here. This podcast is meant to inspire and inform so we can live our best life. Before we get into the podcast today, I just want to remind you to please follow me on social media at Leah Guy Live on Instagram and Facebook. And these podcasts will be in video form on YouTube within a week of the podcast launch. So you can follow me there, Leah Guy, or A Girl Named Guy. Now, last week in the podcast, we were talking about, is change really possible? And of course, if you listen to the podcast, you know my answer to that. And today's guest is a very, very important leader in the realm of change and personal growth and development. Her name is Ellie Shefi. And I call her a change maker. Other people might see her as a civil rights attorney, a international best-selling author, and so many other things. So let's get to know Ellie and see what inspiration she has for us today. Hi, Ellie.
Hi, welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you. So we're talking about change. Is it possible? And I know in our communication, we were going back and forth about how to give ourselves permission to do and be the kind of person that we want to be without doing so much all the time. And you work a lot with, I think, women and men across the board. Is that true? Or do you primarily focus on women's work?
Absolutely. So throughout my different programs, some are co-ed and some are targeted to women. So I absolutely serve both.
Okay. So I called you a change maker. I know you have books and you have programs and you do a lot of different things. What do you spend the majority of your time doing?
Helping people step into the person that they desire to be so they can have the life they desire to have, and they can affect the change that they want to make. So I love that we're having this conversation because to answer the question that you talked about last week, absolutely change is possible, and each and every one of us can affect that change.
Yes. So that's what you do. Now, in the context of what we're talking about today, I want to ask, what do you be? Who is your being? Who are you when you're not doing?
At my very essence, I am a light into the world. Everything that I've overcome has shaped who I am, and that fuels my why, and that is the soul and the essence of who I am.
Okay. So both Ellie and I know a lot of our listeners have had a lot of adversities, traumas, afflictions, and so forth. I speak about it openly in my books and my work and my podcast. And I know you do as well. So tell us a little bit, Ellie, about what tell us one of the most impactful experiences that you had to overcome.
Oh, wow. There have been so many. As you know, I'm an abuse survivor, a rape survivor, and a domestic violence survivor who's actually lived in hiding under a fake name and a ghost file. I've been homeless and lived in my car and eaten the food restaurants we're throwing away at the end of the night. And I am a cancer survivor and a medical miracle who's been defying the doctor's death deadlines for over 20 years. So the first time I heard "you'll be dead by," they said I'd be dead by Christmas of 2000. And I've continued to hear those expiration dates all the way through my cancer journey in 2019. And so I would say there have been several really pivotal moments. Perhaps living in hiding was one of the first really, really big ones. Because that's not only having your voice taken from you, but that's actually, I mean, even the police said, here's your new identity. Here's your new name. Don't tell anyone who you are. Don't tell anyone where you're from. Don't tell anyone anything about you. And
Wow.
here I was in a strange city, not knowing anyone, absolutely terrified, being told that I couldn't use my voice, that I had to be invisible. And that was such a reinforcement of everything that had happened in my life with the childhood abuse
Right.
and rape. And it was this institutional reinforcement of shh,
Yeah. Be silent.
be silent and
Yeah.
be invisible.
Wow. So I want to hear a little more about what brought you to that. I feel like it was a relationship issue. Is that correct?
Yeah. So
Okay.
I was in a domestic violence marriage, and
For how long?
only 3 years.
Okay.
So it wasn't that long of a marriage, but I was starting to die. So because of the extent of the abuse, my organs started to shut down,
Oh, wow.
and then my system started to shut down. And that's when the doctor said I would be dead by Christmas. And I never told anyone about what was going on. I continued to function out in the world. I was in law school at the time, actually, and I continued to go to class, and I continued to be at the top of my class and be on journals and do all the things. And I never said a word.
Why didn't you say a word?
I think because at that point, having already a lifetime of abuse and all of the stuff that goes along with that, having already been raped by that point and reporting it to the university and having them say there was nothing they could do about it, and nothing ever happened. I think by that point I was so conditioned to, my voice doesn't matter, no, no one is going to do anything anyway, that
Right.
whole resignation.
Right.
And then by that point, I had learned that the path of least resistance was the best path.
Mm.
And that if I just kept my mouth shut and did what I was told to do, it would be less bad.
Yeah, it's a real struggle. Yeah, and I've talked about this with another guest to a certain point, but when you're going through something like that, and especially you have history, there's subconsciously and emotionally, there's so much overwhelm and processing going on. That's one piece of it. And then this other piece of whether we're being shamed or feel shame or being bullied or being, told we're wrong or lying or something, that's another piece of it. And then the whole judicial system is another piece of it. And so I can totally understand, and you're not the only one, of course, who using all of that energy just to stay alive and navigate and cope with all those different immense, enormous difficulties, especially as a child. It's too much. What else can you do? There, for myself, the best I could do was lay in bed and, paint walls for my dad while he worked all day. That was all I could do, and cry and try to manage anxiety. So I totally understand. And I'm curious, with you in the legal system, and as well as having all of this background of abuse and domestic violence, do you believe that with the Me Too movement or other movements that are happening right now, that there's some justice that's coming about? Or do you think it's creating more problems and issues for people who are really struggling?
That's a tough question. I think undeniably, from my perspective, as the dean of a law school, as the former dean of criminology and criminal justice, as the staff attorney to a federal judge, and as a survivor myself, our system is severely broken.
Yes.
And I don't think that the Me Too movement has fixed it. I think it's what the Me Too movement has done, from my perspective, is raise awareness, is create some empowerment for women to know that we can use our voice, that we do have a voice, that we're not alone, that there is a way to be seen. I'm not sure that that has translated yet into significantly different legislation or significantly different outcomes in the judicial system. As I mentioned, I was in law school, and my abusive now ex-husband was at the same law school, and he was a presidential scholar. So he was the golden boy on a full ride. And here at a top 10 very prestigious law school, I was told I couldn't get a restraining order because they wouldn't be able to enforce it, because he had the right to be in the same classroom as I, and he was in the right, he had the right to walk the same halls as I, and he, as a student, he had a right to be there as well. And so they would not be able to enforce, 100 feet
Right.
barrier. And so here you are yet again. I mean,
What can you do?
You're in an institution to create lawyers.
And yeah.
Sorry, we can't help you. There's
Right.
nothing about it.
I find it really interesting. I'm having this conversation with you today because, as I mentioned in my podcast last week, I've been watching the Johnny Depp trial, and then I also started watching this Netflix show. It's called, I think, Anatomy of a Scandal, which introduces, abuse and so forth in the judicial system over in Europe. So anyway, it is a huge problem. And also part of that problem in looking at domestic situations is not just against women. There's a lot of men who are silent and silenced due to their own shame, due to their own embarrassment, due to their own lack of support, who are getting abused emotionally, psychologically, physically on the regular.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. And, and where's the platform for them? It's so imbalanced and broken, the whole system. I agree. And I don't want to go too far down this line, but I do think you have an interesting perspective because you're both in that system and you've been a victim to a lot of abuse. I want to ask a very personal question, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
I appreciate and love that you shared that you are the light, you are a light to the world, as I desire to be as well. And I also want to know what parts of you are still hurting, what parts of you are still challenged and traumatized or suffering.
Physically, I don't remember what it's like to not live in pain. I don't remember what that is like. So that is a part that is still healing. I'm a firm believer, especially having navigated everything that I have, in a mind-body connection. So obviously, for me, obviously, I should say, if there isn't a day that goes by that I'm not in physical pain or discomfort, then there is some level of emotional work that still needs to be done, since there is such a profound mind-body connection. So I'm constantly looking to uncover even more layers of the onion. I have done extensive work on myself over the last 25 years or so. When I was in hiding, I was in trauma therapy for anywhere from 9 to 16 hours a day, every single day, learning to function again.
Wow.
Extensive. And I have done all the different modalities that I could
right.
find, and really integrating them because they have such value, at least for me. And so I would say that the really deep rooted underlying causes of the physical pain that have yet to be discovered, those are areas that are still there. I still struggle with the body dysmorphia. I know when I look in the mirror, to me, I still see that 212-pound person staring back, who was full of tumors and whose organs were shutting down. I don't see, when I look in the mirror, what other people see. So that is a constant evolution of healing through that.
Mm-hmm.
I would also say the fact that I prefer to not be in a relationship is an area that still needs to be healed.
Right.
I feel much safer and much more uh, in control of my path and my purpose and my mission and what I can do when I do it alone.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. That's all good insights. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. What I've been noticing recently, there's a lot of conversation about imposter syndrome and, the social media world, the healing world gets on these certain phrases and topics and, takes off with it. But whatever we want to call it, I don't know that I would classify it as that because I've never really identified with that. I feel very connected to my work and my purpose. However, what I've noticed in this chapter of my healing work, especially I've been living primarily alone for the past 2 years in this really old house and having, a lot of different opportunities for reflection, both consciously and subconsciously in my dream time and otherwise. But I've noticed a more delineation between myself as the person who's still healing or my shadow side or the part of me that's still kind of it needs a little kick in the pants sometimes, versus the part of me that shows up for my work. I'm noticing a clear delineation and I feel great when I'm working. I feel great in all capacities of my work. I'm I feel very purposeful. I feel passionate. I feel in it. I'm charged by it, all of that. It's in the extended and extensive. And I think many people may be able to relate to this, what I'm saying, especially through COVID, these extended periods of time alone. That's when we have that really juicy part of our lives and the time to look at and go, okay, who am I? Who am I in this alone space? Not having interacted with anyone for 3 days. Who am I with nothing to do? Who am I if my identity and my label and my job function changes? And and those are kind of the easy who am I to look at, but when we can go there on our own, just in those quiet, still moments in the middle of an afternoon and just feel who we are and feel our centeredness and or when we feel imbalanced. I think those are very powerful moments and they're scary for a lot of us because we don't want to feel any lingering difficulties or suffering. We only want to be in the high or in the purpose or in the you know in the work or in the doing and being successful and being meaningful. So what would you say? I don't know. First of all, can you relate to any of that I'm sharing?
Absolutely, 100%. And one of the things that I like to share with people who are fearful of doing that introspection, who are fearful of the stillness, who are fearful of the exploration, is to look at it almost as a game.
Mm-hmm.
So, ooh,
Yeah.
interesting. Ooh, that's fascinating. What else
Right.
discover instead of looking at it? Because I think people, a lot of people who are fearful of doing that introspection, who are fearful of digging deep, are fearful because there's a little bit of that current of blame or guilt or shame.
Right. Yes.
And so,
There's always that question of what's wrong with me,
yes,
or what's still wrong with me, especially for a person who's been on the hit. When can I change? What can I do better?
yeah,
Right. And if we can silence that voice, not silence it, but observe it with some compassion and speak to it in the tone of there's nothing better to do. Can we just accept this part of ourselves right now? I find that to be, and I love what you just said, because I talk to myself that like that a lot of times. I'll notice something or a recurring thought or something I'm doing. I go, wow, isn't that something?
fascinating, amazing. Thanks, subconscious, for sharing this with me. Like, yeah, how amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thanks for that. So tell me, how does your work evolve during the day? You have so many different kind of facets to your work. what do you spend your time? I know I asked you earlier about what you primarily do, but how does it show up in your day-to-day work with people?
So people laugh hysterically when they see my office because there are 4 computers lined up next to each other, each with different sounds. I have a chair with wheels and hardwood floors, and imagine a typewriter. So I slide down, I hear ding. Oh, that's the university computer. Let me slide down and answer that email or do that work. And then ding, oh, that's the government computer. Let me slide down and answer that email.
Oh my goodness.
That work. And ding, oh, that's the nonprofit computer. Because I am still currently the dean of a law school. I am still the staff attorney to a federal judge. And then I have 3 companies, 2 publishing houses, and a nonprofit. So,
Ellie, that's a little too much. I'm just going to tell you, I've got a lot going on, but that's what you just described. That's a little too much.
well, that's why I relate so heavily to what you shared about who am I when I'm not working, and
You're
yet,
asleep. That's what you are when you're not working.
from 11 to 7, and yet I identify because everything I do fuels me.
Mm-hmm.
So everything I do, I'm so aligned. I'm so conscious and intentional with how I spend my time and what I do and how I do it. For me, you asked earlier about a turning point, and I shared the living and hiding turning point. Another major turning point for me was the cancer diagnosis in 2019.
Mm-hmm.
And I had really stepped into my purpose, so I thought, prior to that. So I had built a career doing civil rights law and giving a voice to the voiceless and being an advocate and a champion for change. And everything I did in my legal career was civil rights law, constitutional law, discrimination law, 1983, which is prison conditions, really being that advocate for social change, for justice, for equal access to education and medical care and transportation and voting rights and all the things, right? And I built this nice, cushy, cozy life where I was a change maker behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
I was like the person in the Wizard of Oz, the woman behind the curtain, that was the implementation strategist, that was the vehicle for so many others to shine. And I was so happy to do it behind the scenes because I had been so programmed to be invisible and all the things.
Right.
Something completely shifted when the doctor came in and said, "I'm so sorry, Ellie, but it's cancer."
What kind of cancer? Do you mind sharing?
Sure. I mean, in that moment, time stopped. And I had this overwhelming sense of, oh my God, I've been playing small.
Mm.
And I am not going to play small anymore.
Yeah.
And there was this overwhelming sense, even though I'd literally been having death deadlines for 20 years by that point. You know, they started in 1999. And they said I'd be dead by Christmas of 2000.
Because of what?
So many different things, because of the domestic violence, and living in extreme trauma for 25 years already at that point.
Mm.
I developed adrenal tumor Cushing's. It's super rare. It's 2 people in every million. And mine was cyclical, which is unheard of. So I'm one of 5 reported cases in history.
Mm.
What happened is I started to develop tumors, and my adrenal gland itself developed a secreting tumor. So I was 212 pounds. I was a walking steroid. When you have that much cortisol, it overtakes the rest of your organs and systems and chemicals, and things shut down and stop working, and then you die because you can't survive.
Right. That's a very, very big stress response, it sounds like, in your
huge
body,
So
right?
the only known cause for adrenal tumor Cushing's is living for prolonged periods in extreme fight or flight.
Right. This is what's so important for people to understand about stress, about trauma, about emotional distress. It is so much deeper than what we feel and then, oh, we get over it emotionally. No, it
Oh,
starts to affect every part of our body system.
yeah.
Yeah.
People don't realize that our emotional responses create chemical responses in our body.
Yes.
When you're happy and you have happy chemicals, and when
Right.
you're upset, and I mean, I like to always remind people, when you're stressed, notice what happens. Your breathing gets more shallow, your heart rate elevates, you feel more pressure, there's a weight on your chest.
Mm-hmm.
These are physiological responses that happen to our
Yeah.
our
Not to mention physical exhaustion, brain fatigue, brain fog, all the things,
all
right?
the things.
So many symptoms that show up when we have too much stress or repetitive stress. And people, in the line of work that I do, of course, with when I'm working with clients, they there's a big disconnect between um this an argument or a negative relationship with our family or with so and so whatever, and being in that and recognizing the impact of that on their body, and
Yeah,
so it's very important that people realize and then know how to rehabilitate themselves physically and emotionally
yeah,
to come back
absolutely.
to center. Yeah.
Yeah, that disconnect. I mean, people so often they say, oh, well, get over it. Oh,
Yeah.
I'm just going to turn off an emotion. But then they're not doing anything to heal the physical damage that has already occurred because of the physiological and biochemical reaction.
Yes.
So that's kind of why I mentioned earlier. I mean, there's such a profound mind-body connection, and we
Yes.
have to learn to pay attention to that.
Yes.
So the fact that I am in physical pain every day is an indicator to me
Right.
that there is underlying mental, emotional, spiritual, psychological. There's some baggage that needs to be unpacked if
Hmm.
I'm having a physical sensation, because
Right.
it's tied together.
Right. So let's talk about this work scenario because now I'm concerned about your work scenario. You want to have a relationship, and I understand completely why there'd be so much fear and distrust around that. But not only for you, but for the many people who are listening that perhaps overwork to fill their time, to fill the void, to um, stop the possibility or opportunity from happening. I think that's what happens for so many people, especially type A people that, often come from that need to overachieve, the need to survive, the need to prove themselves for validation and so forth. I get that. But this filling our space so that we don't have the emptiness or that discomfort of either the who am I when this isn't my identity, or the who am I in relation to the divine, to divine intimacy, to partnership, to love. Who am I in my most vulnerable state?
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
Yeah. And who am I to be able to receive, or where am I blocking the ability to receive comfort? Right. Especially for people, and I talk about in my book, Overcoming Toxic Emotions, the addiction to pain and the vibrational frequency and the energy that's attached to our emotional imprints that are formed from our core wounds and so forth. We have this sensation, this belief system that's wrapped in energy and sensation about what reality feels like. And even though we wouldn't classify that as comfortable, it is our comfort place. And we get so used to feeling pain that we don't know how to experience and sustain and accept the feelings of pleasure. And
Yeah.
so, my prescription for you today, Ellie, not that you're asking, is to maybe sign off an hour early, turn one of the computers off, and allow yourself an hour of pleasure today. How about that?
That sounds great.
Yeah. But seriously, I do it too. And like I was saying, I feel very comfortable in my work, and I hear you do as well. And I think many people do, especially entrepreneurs and people are passionate, but we have to be very cautious of, where we're creating that imbalance
Yeah.
of, you know, kind of sending all of our energy towards one place and not being open and available in another place.
Oh,
So,
100%. And I think for myself and for others who are really leaning into their purpose, like I mentioned, everything shifted for me with the cancer diagnosis. And when I realized I was playing small, and and I had this overwhelming sensation of, oh my God, I don't know how much time I have left. So I need to live my purpose. I need to create as much change, to have as much of an impact in this world as I can. It was uterine cancer, so I had a hysterectomy, and I wasn't able to have kids because of the domestic violence and the damage, and then the hysterectomy. So then there was the sense of, why am I here, to your point earlier, and will my existence have even mattered without having a legacy through children or family? And how am I going to really contribute and make sure that my life mattered, my time on this earth mattered, navigating all of the abuse and the trauma and all of the experiences in my life? How am I going to use that to where I didn't experience those things in vain, where I can use those for a greater purpose? And to your point about those of us who are type A, I wouldn't know anything about that. Those of us who are type A, kind of being imbalanced or having the propensity to throw ourselves into achievement or contribution to the detriment of balance. For me, that absolutely has happened since that cancer diagnosis. And that was in 2019, and then we had COVID.
Yeah.
And I'm alone, and I live alone, and I'm immunocompromised, being a cancer survivor and, a medical miracle. So I was 100% alone for the first 18 months of COVID in my little 800 square foot apartment. And so, I wrote 5 books and launched 3 companies and 2 publishing houses and the nonprofit. Because what else was I going to do when I was by myself? In this time where I couldn't go anywhere and I couldn't do anything. So I just leaned into service. And definitely, to your point, in doing that, in working like a banshee, 16 hours a day, 18 hours a day, service, impact, change. Yes, I love it, and it fuels my soul, and it is who I am, and it is what I was put on this earth to do. But in creating that dynamic, I have not created space for anything else in my life at all.
Right. Yeah.
So
It's important we see that. And when you say about, I know another concern for many people is, how does my life matter? And I don't have kids of my own either. I have 2 stepkids that who I love, but it's a different relationship, and when you don't have children, or maybe you're the last one in the lineup of your family, that kind of thing. And even if you do have children, I think a lot of people are asked that question, how does my life matter? And for me, I think that life matters, and that ego part of us and the emotional part of us that tries to make sense of so many things in our life, in our society. When we look at animals, when we look at trees, when we look at other sentient beings, they matter just because. But we've wrapped this idea around something, we have to be special somehow in order to matter, right? And I think that beingness and the just being present of we matter, period. That's the goal, to try to, to own that, to feel into that space. Because it's a big question for a lot of people.
We're seeing it come to the forefront even more right now, not only with the Great Resignation and the Great Reset, but to your point earlier, during COVID, when so many of us were alone, or when we had that time to introspect, whether we wanted to or not, here we are. I think really now more than ever, people have taken that time to reflect on their life, to to really take a good hard look. Am I happy? Am I contributing? Am I living my purpose? Do I like my work? Does my work fulfill me?
Right.
Yeah, it's an interesting time, right? To
It
really
is.
consciousness, to really see these conversations happening.
Yeah, it's a
And
beautiful time. Beautiful and challenging, but challenges are what makes beauty, I think, in a certain way. Well, Ellie, you're a beautiful person, and thank you for sharing with us today. She has several books, as she mentioned. She cranked out books during COVID, Women Who Shine, other topics. All of her links will be in the show notes under the podcast. And if you'd like to know more about her, find her there. And I just want to encourage you to keep shining your light. And thank you so much for sharing your inspiration and overcoming everything that you've overcome.
thank you so much for having me.
Yes. And until next time, we will see you on the Modern Sage podcast.